In October of 1996, the United States Forest Service, Ozark St. Francis National Forests Division, generated an internal field incident summary designated under the Arkansas District 7 Corridor Review Program. The document, a standard 4-page assessment form used for logging access evaluations and watershed boundary corrections, was routed through the Regional Planning Office in Russellville and stamped received on the 14th of that month. It documented a routine topographic survey of an unnamed ridge corridor in the Buffalo River watershed, approximately 12 miles northeast of the town of Boxley, in Newton County, Arkansas. The summary recorded standard findings for the first 3 days of the assignment: soil core samples, canopy density measurements, GIS coordinate verification against existing topographic overlays. On page 3, in a section designated for anomalous field observations, a single entry had been made. It described a compaction zone in grid quadrant 7 delta, with dimensions that did not correspond to any mapped feature in the district record. Soil displacement measurements were included. A photograph reference number was listed. The photograph was not attached. The summary ends at the bottom of page 3. Page 4, the section for supervisor review and follow-up action, is blank. No follow-up file was ever generated under that document number. I spent 19 years with the United States Forest Service. I was a district surveyor assigned to the Arkansas Field Division, operating primarily across Newton, Searcy, and Marion counties in the Ozark Highlands. My work was technical: grid verification, boundary correction, watershed delineation. I was not a ranger. I carried no sidearm. I walked a great deal of land and recorded what I found. The survey I am describing was my assignment. The field incident summary I just described was mine to file. I have not filed a voluntary field assignment since 2003. I did not speak about this while I was employed. I did not speak about it when I retired in 2009. I agreed to speak now because the junior surveyor on my team, a man named Dale Hutchins, died last spring. I am the last living member of that survey team. I will not provide the exact grid coordinates of the site. That is my only condition. Everything else I will tell you accurately and in sequence. The Buffalo River watershed in the central Ozarks of northern Arkansas is limestone karst country. The ridgelines run northeast to southwest along ancient fault seams, and the terrain breaks sharply between open cedar glades and dense mixed hardwood hollows. In the area we were assigned, the elevation ran between 1,400 and 1,600 feet along the primary ridge. The nearest paved road was Arkansas Highway 65, approximately 12 miles to the west. The nearest structure of any kind was a seasonal hunting camp that had not been used in several years. We accessed the site by Forest Service Maintenance Road, a 2-track that dead-ended at a dry creek crossing, and established base camp at that crossing on the morning of September 9th. We carried 4 days of supplies. Resupply was scheduled for day 2. Delivered by a second vehicle, driven by our division coordinator out of Russellville. My team was 3 people. I was the lead surveyor, responsible for the topographic assessment and the final field report. Dale Hutchins was 28 years old at the time. He had been with the Forest Service for 3 years. He handled the soil core sampling and maintained the field log. Dale was the kind of worker who wrote everything down and questioned nothing he could not measure. The third member of our team was a contracted GIS technician named Marisol Reyes. She had been contracted through a university mapping program and had worked 2 previous Forest Service surveys without incident. Her job was to verify our field coordinates against satellite positioning data and flag any discrepancy between our physical measurements and the existing topographic overlays. Our equipment was standard for the period. a transit level on a tripod, soil core samplers in 3 diameter sizes, a handheld radio on the district frequency, paper topographic overlays printed from the regional planning office. Marisol carried a GPS receiver and a laptop in a hard case that she was very protective of. The first day was unremarkable. We walked the primary ridge from the creek crossing northeast, dropping survey stakes at measured intervals. Collecting core samples at each grid intersection, the sky was clear. The temperature dropped sharply after 3 in the afternoon, as it does in the Ozarks in September. And we returned to camp before dark with 12 hours of clean, usable field data. There was one thing I noted in my personal field log that first evening, though I did not include it in the formal record. Approximately 900 feet along the ridge from our base camp, we passed through a stand of old-growth white oak. The trees were large, easily a century old, with canopy coverage dense enough to suppress most ground-level growth. That was normal. What I noted was that the suppression in this particular stand was complete. Not reduced, complete. No undergrowth of any kind, not leaf litter reduced by shade. Nothing. The soil between the trees was bare and pale, almost gray in color, as if the organic layer had been removed. I wrote in my personal log, canopy suppression complete, investigate if time allows. I attributed it to the density of the canopy and moved on. On the morning of the second day, Dale was awake before the rest of us and had coffee going by 6. I remember that specifically because the coffee was already cold by the time I poured mine, which meant he had been up for longer than he admitted. Marisol was running her first equipment calibration check of the day, cycling through her GPS coordinates and verifying our overnight position had not drifted in the system. We planned to complete the southeastern quadrant of the grid that day and meet the resupply vehicle at the creek crossing by early afternoon. We did not complete the southeastern quadrant. At approximately 9 in the morning, Dale pulled a soil core from grid quadrant 7 delta that registered an anomalous compaction density. The instrument used to measure compaction resistance is called a penetrometer. It measures in units of pounds per square inch. The surrounding grid quadrants had returned readings consistent with undisturbed Ozark highland soil, ranging between 40 and 60 pounds per square inch at standard depth. The core from quadrant 7 delta returned a reading of 230 pounds per square inch. That is the compaction density of packed gravel road base. Dale flagged it, and we expanded the sample points within the quadrant to define the boundary of the anomaly. It took the better part of 2 hours when we finished. We had documented a compaction zone with dimensions of 31 feet in one direction and 14 feet in the other. The zone was oriented precisely on a north-south axis. The surface above it was indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. There was no depression, no surface feature, no visible boundary. Dale looked at the measurements for a while and then said it was probably an old logging road. He was not wrong to say it. Logging operations in Newton County in the early 20th century had left compacted access corridors across a great deal of the highland terrain, and those corridors retained their density for decades. A rectangular corridor was unusual, but not impossible if it had served a turnaround or staging area. I recorded his assessment in the field log as a probable explanation, and we moved on. That evening, writing in my personal log, I noted one thing I did not say aloud. Logging roads do not run in rectangles. 6 weeks after returning from the survey, I submitted a formal records request to the Osage Nation Cultural Preservation Office in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. I want to be precise about why I contacted them specifically. The Osage Nation's historical territory covered a substantial portion of what is now northern Arkansas and southern Missouri. The Arkansas Ozarks were part of their recognized hunting and ceremonial range before removal. When I returned from the survey, I began pulling historical records for the Buffalo River watershed area, and I found a reference in an 1891 Bureau of Indian Affairs land use inventory to a site designation in Newton County that had been recorded in Osage Protocol and flagged for a specific category of land management consideration. The designation was not in English. The Bureau document transliterated it phonetically and offered a functional translation. The translation was, "the ground that holds." I contacted the Cultural Preservation Office because I wanted to understand what that designation meant in practice. I was connected after several weeks with Raymond Tall Chief. Raymond was 67 years old at the time. He had served as the Osage Nation's Land Heritage Liaison for 22 years, a position within the tribal government responsible for maintaining the formal record of designated sites and coordinating with federal agencies on land use matters that intersected with those designations. He was not a ceremonial figure. He was an administrator. He had a title, a budget, and a filing system. He was willing to speak because the survey activity at that location had already been reported to his office. A tribal observer working in the area had noted our vehicles on the maintenance road and filed an informal report with the Preservation Office. Raymond had been expecting contact from someone. He told me that the designation "the ground that holds" had been in continuous formal Osage protocol for at least 140 years in the written record, and that the oral record extended the designation considerably further back. He was careful to draw a distinction I want to pass along, because I think it is important. He said that belief and protocol are not the same thing. Belief is personal. A person can believe or not believe anything about a given place, and that has no institutional weight. Protocol is different. Protocol is written down. Protocol is passed from one office holder to the next regardless of what either one personally believes. Protocol does not require belief to be followed. It requires following. The formal protocol associated with the ground that holds was avoidance. The site was not to be entered, camped within, or surveyed. The protocol did not specify a reason in the written record. Raymond said that, in his experience, the absence of a stated reason in a protocol of that age and consistency was itself meaningful. Reasons get added when people stop understanding something and need to explain it to themselves. When a protocol is old enough and consistent enough that no one has felt the need to add a reason, it usually means the reason has always been self-evident to everyone present. I asked him what the site was known to do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was not going to answer that question, because the protocol did not require him to justify it, only to maintain it. And he had been maintaining it for 22 years. He said he hoped we had not camped within the perimeter. I told him where our base camp had been located. He did not respond to that. He thanked me for calling and ended the conversation. On the morning of the third day, Marisol began her equipment calibration check at 6:30. The routine took approximately 20 minutes and required her to cycle through a series of position verifications and compare them against the previous days. Baseline, she ran it every morning without exception. At 6:55, she called me over to where the transit level was set up on its tripod at the edge of camp. The transit level had been moved. Not fallen, not disturbed. Moved. The tripod legs had been repositioned, and the instrument had been re-leveled. I know it had been re-leveled because the bubble level was centered. If something had simply knocked it or dragged it, the bubble would have been off. It was not off. Someone or something had picked up the instrument, moved it approximately 8 feet from where Dale had set it up the previous evening, and re-leveled it on new ground. It was facing the white oak stand. Dale's explanation was that one of us had moved it in the night without remembering, possibly while half asleep. That explanation required one of us to have performed a precise leveling operation while unconscious, in the dark, and then returned to our sleeping bags without waking anyone. None of us said that aloud. While we were standing there looking at the transit level, I walked the perimeter of camp. I was not looking for anything specific. I was doing what you do when something is wrong, and you do not have a better response. I found marks on 2 saplings at the eastern edge of camp. The bark had been removed in vertical strips, not torn. Removed cleanly, in parallel lines, each line separated from the next by a consistent interval. I measured the interval with my thumb and forefinger, and then measured my hand span against my field notebook that evening. The interval between the lines was approximately 2.5 inches. I photographed the saplings. I know what bears do to trees. I have spent nearly 2 decades working in forested terrain. Bears strip bark. They do not strip it in parallel vertical lines at measured intervals. I did not tell Dale what I was thinking. I wrote it in my personal log. I slept very little that night. The final morning began the way the others had. I filled the fuel canister for the portable generator at 7:15. That is the kind of task you do automatically, without thinking. And I remember doing it specifically, because it was the last normal thing that happened. Marisol did not come to breakfast. We assumed she was in her tent. Dale called to her after 10 minutes. No response. I went to check and the tent was empty. Her sleeping bag was laid out. Her boots were by the tent entrance. Her hard case was open, and the laptop was running its sleep cycle. Her boots were still there. We spent 40 minutes searching the camp perimeter and the immediate area. Dale was controlled about it. I was less controlled than I appeared. I found her 200 yards into the white oak stand. She was standing, upright, facing north, toward the interior of the grove. She was not injured. She was not distressed in any visible way. When I called her name, she turned around and looked at me with an expression I do not have a word for. Not confusion exactly. More like the expression of a person who has just been woken in the middle of a sentence and cannot remember what they were saying. She could not tell us how she got there. She could not tell us how long she had been standing there. Her last memory was beginning the morning calibration check at the laptop. The next memory was hearing her name. We did not discuss it at length. I made the decision to break camp, and I told them both we were leaving. Dale had questions. I told him to pack. It was while I was striking the tent stakes that I looked up toward the tree line. At the northern boundary of the white oak stand, where the pale bare ground met the edge of the mature canopy, something was standing. It was not moving. I could not see detail at that distance. I was not wearing my distance glasses. What I could see was a vertical shape, dark against the pale ground, and the morning shadow under the canopy. It was standing still the way you stand still when you are watching something. And then it was not there. I did not say anything. I finished striking the stakes. We loaded the vehicles and drove out. The following morning, I measured the white oak I had used as a reference point for my estimate. The tree measured 11 feet 4 inches to the first major branch. The shape I had seen was standing at ground level and extended to roughly 3/4 of that first branch height. My estimate, based on that reference, placed its standing height between 8 and 9 feet. I filed the field incident report on return to Russellville. I described the compaction anomaly, the repositioned instrument, the bark damage, Marisol's episode, and my visual observation. I used neutral language. I included the photograph reference numbers for both the sapling marks and the compaction zone measurements. I submitted the report through standard routing. 6 weeks later, I received a visit from a single investigator, assigned by the Regional Planning Office. He spent one day at the district office in Russellville. He did not return to the site. He reviewed my field photographs and my field log copies, and he wrote a one-paragraph assessment. The paragraph attributed the compaction anomaly to a pre-existing access corridor, predating current survey records. It attributed the bark damage to wildlife activity, specifically deer antler rubbing. It attributed the repositioned transit level to equipment instability on uneven ground. It attributed Marisol's episode to fatigue and possible mild dehydration. The formal incident was assigned the file designation Forest Service Field Incident Report 96, Arkansas, District 7, 004. Marisol Reyes's account was not referenced in the official file. She had been a contracted employee, not a Forest Service staff member. And her name did not appear in the incident report at all. My district supervisor at the time was a woman named Carol Fentress. Carol had been with the Forest Service for 14 years and was one of the most competent administrators I worked under. When I showed her the investigator's assessment, she did not accept it. She submitted a formal escalation request to the Regional Safety Board, citing the compaction anomaly dimensions and the unresolved circumstances of the contractor's episode as grounds for a follow-up physical investigation. Her escalation request was returned unfiled. The notation on the return document cited insufficient incident threshold under regional review guidelines. Carol told me that she had never had a request returned on that basis. That notation was not a standard category she had encountered in 14 years of filings. She submitted a second request 6 months later. It was also returned. She retired the following year. The Grid Quadrant 7 Delta Compaction Zone was reclassified in the district record as a pre-survey access corridor. Historical origin undetermined. It was removed from the active anomaly tracking list. The unmarked zone, the area surrounding the site that had appeared on our internal planning maps as a white rectangle with no designation. Code, no access classification, no management notation of any kind, remained on those maps exactly as it had been. White undesignated. Without explanation, I asked before I retired where that boundary had come from. Who had drawn it and when, and under what authority? The question required 3 separate records requests over 14 months. The answer I received was that the boundary designation had been entered in the district record prior to the current records management system, and that no originating document could be located. I know that originating document exists. Before our survey was assigned, I saw a routing memo that referenced it by document number. I did not think to copy the number at the time because I had no reason to believe it would matter. I have thought about that routing memo many times. Dale Hutchins spent the remaining years of his career doing desk work. He transferred out of the Arkansas Field Division within a year of the survey. We stayed in contact. He never spoke about what happened that September in any detail. But every year on roughly the same date he would send me a brief message. No explanation. Just the date written out and his name. I do not know if he was marking the anniversary to remember it, or to confirm that another year had passed without having to go back. He died last April, cardiac event. He was 60 years old. Marisol Reyes, I was told by a mutual contact. Left field work entirely within 2 years of the survey. I have not had contact with her. I do not know what she remembered afterward, or whether she remembered anything at all. I am speaking now because I am the last one who was there. The thing that I have never been able to account for is not the compaction zone. And it is not what I saw at the tree line. Those things happened, and they are outside what I know how to explain. But they are at least events I can describe with some precision. What I cannot account for is the boundary. Someone drew a line around that area on an internal Forest Service map before we arrived. That line was in the system when our survey was assigned. It was not labeled, it was not explained. No one I asked over 14 years of trying could produce the document that authorized it. That means someone in a position of institutional authority had been to that site, or had received a report from someone who had, and had made a deliberate decision. Not to investigate, not to disclose, not to warn, to draw a line around it and leave it white. The file is still open under District 7. The designation is still blank. The routing memo I saw in 1996 references a document number I did not write down, for a boundary drawn by a hand I never identified, around a piece of ground in the Ozark Highlands that the Osage Nation has formally avoided for at least 140 years. I do not go above 1,200 feet in forested terrain anymore. I have not since 2003. People who know me have stopped asking why. Raymond Tall Chief told me the protocol did not require a reason. It required following. The white oak stand is still there. The pale ground between those trees is still bare. Whatever they drew that line around is still inside it. And somewhere in a filing system I was never able to fully access. The document that started all of this is still waiting to be found.